I think we'd all like to think and believe that slavery doesn't exist anymore, but according to the official statistics, in 2016, there were about 46 million slaves on the planet. 70% of whom are women, and the remaining 30 were men. So which states still have slavery? Hey guys, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to be talking about a country that is probably the last one in the world where slavery is still considered the norm. If you were to try and characterize this country in a few words, they'd be filth, poverty, crime, unemployment, illiteracy, and slavery. So, Mauritania. The Islamic Republic of Mauritania is a state in West Africa, which has access to the Atlantic Ocean. The Sahara Desert leaves its traces everywhere in this country, covering everything with sand, even the city streets. It is responsible for many of the country's hardships, such as the lack of water and vegetation, poverty, heat, and dust storms. Mauritania has neither rich resources, nor developed industry, nor tourism. The country's deposits of iron and copper ores are mined by foreign companies and don't actually belong to the local authorities. The country's manufacturing base is the most underdeveloped in Africa. Mauritania is one of the most economically underdeveloped countries in the world. The country is in 131st place in terms of GDP per capita. 40% of the population lives below the poverty line. The unemployment rate in the country is 30%. The average life expectancy is 60 years. 40% of men and 60% of women are illiterate. This country is one of the 10 least visited countries in the world. The population of this country is 3.3 million people. 100% of the population are Muslims. 50% of the working population is employed in agriculture, 10% in industry, and 40% in the service sector. Mauritania is the last state in the world where slave owners don't get persecuted. Despite the official abolition of slavery, first in 1980, Mauritania was the last country in the world where it was still allowed. And then in 2007, de facto, about 20% of the population of Mauritania are slaves. There are no reliable statistics on how many slaves there are in Mauritania, because the country's government doesn't take them into account during the census, and denies the very fact of their existence. However, according to human rights activists, up to 740,000 of the country's residents actually remain in slavery to this day. Thus, Mauritania is the largest stronghold of traditional slavery on the planet. Most of the slaves are black people owned by the ruling class of Berbers. Slaves don't have any personal, economic, or political rights. Both men and women are enslaved, and the children born into slavery become the property of the slave owners. The Mauritanian government denies the existence of slaves, and although it is illegal to own slaves, forced labor isn't prohibited in the country. Slaves do all the dirtiest and hardest work. Typical tasks the slaves get are working in the fields, caring for livestock, and serving in the house. Slavery in Mauritania arose as a result of some historical events. Arabic-speaking Moors raided African villages for centuries, which resulted in a rigid caste system that still exists today. The dark-skinned slaves still serve their fair-skinned masters, Arabs. The descendants of the black population enslaved many generations ago make up the Heriton caste. Slavery is hereditary, which means that the children of slaves belong to the masters of their parents, and even de jure freed slaves virtually continue to live as slaves, unable to manage the money they earn. The owners of the enslaved Mauritanians treat them like property. They don't pay them for their labor, they often beat them, and they can give them or rent them out. In Mauritania, a slave can be sold. Slaves are sold only on the domestic market. The cost per person is about $100. Given that most of the population lives on less than $2 a day, that's a lot of money. Slaves don't live long, but work for wear and tear throughout their short lives. Those who do not submit or try to escape are beaten to death. Slave owners claim that punishment enhances discipline, and prevents attempts at disobedience. The reports of human rights activists describe the terrible and sophisticated tortures to which slaves are subjected. For example, filling the insides of a person with insects, inserting a red-hot stake into their anus, breaking their joints, etc. Harritons are brought up in such a way that they perceive working for their masters as their religious duty. Slave owners teach them from early childhood that it is only through obedience and devoted service that they would get to go to heaven after death. The dark skin of the Harritons is considered unclean, therefore they are forbidden to touch the Quran and visit mosques. In Mauritania, the saying, "Paradise is at the feet of your master," is very common. Its meaning is that the path to salvation lies in unquestioning obedience. To this day, the descendants of slaves often don't get a passport at birth, they don't go to school, and don't have access to healthcare. The exception is the residents of the capital and its environs. Many of them do get documents and primary education. However, the wind of change hasn't reached the inhabitants of remote provinces, that is, half the population of the country. Slavery is fought by several organizations and a small political party. The government of Mauritania established the Commission for Human Rights in 1999, but it isn't known to have taken any action. There are reports of police complicity in slavery, as well as the imprisonment of activists of non-governmental organizations dealing with forced labor and slavery. The government banned the use of the word slave in the media. The liberation and rehabilitation of slaves in Mauritania is only done by local and international non-governmental organizations. Although some observers note the gradual decrease in the number of enslaved Mauritanians, the situation is exacerbated by the influx of thousands of refugees from neighboring Mali, where military conflict has been ongoing since 2012. There are several factors that get in the way of the implementation of significant changes in this matter. They are the lack of alternative options to earn a living and lack of protection, high levels of illiteracy, limited access to information, as well as separation of family members and the use of methods of control by the slave owners, including influence through religion. It has all led to a deep-rooted acceptance of the victim's inherited status as slaves. In 2007, slavery in Mauritania was criminalized, and in 2015, the authorities toughened the punishment for it from 10 to 20 years in prison. Moreover, special courts were created to try the cases of slave owners, while the victims were offered free legal assistance. However, according to media reports, the perpetrators have been punished only 3 times in recent years. In 2011, the slave owner was sentenced to 6 months in prison, and 2 more were sentenced to 5 years in 2016, but 4 of those years were suspended. The Mauritanian authorities took the first steps towards the comprehensive fight against slavery in 2003, when the government turned to the World Bank and independent experts to create an action plan after the presidential elections. Although the military coup in 2005 slowed down the plan's implementation, some parts were still successfully carried out. For example, a campaign to inform Mauritanians about the abolition of slavery. The country is also fighting corruption at the same time, as well as trying to stimulate economic development. Improving the economy would help free many citizens from slavery. De facto slavery in Mauritania is still a slow and invisible process that leads to the social death of many thousands of men, women, and children. Well, that's all for today. Like the video if you found it interesting, and I feel like this is one that it would be great to share with a friend too and let them know about what's happening in this country. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you again next time.